Hey everybody, Qroo here. In this video, I'll be talking about relative pronouns. Doesn't that sound exciting? Now, you may not be familiar with that grammatical term, so I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about. Take a look at this sentence. The man who lives in the green house is my uncle. Now, the word who in there, that's a relative pronoun. So I have a question for you. If you were going to translate that English sentence into Spanish, which one of these two sentences sounds best to you? El hombre quien vive en la casa verde es mi tío. Or, el hombre que vive en la casa verde es mi tío. One other question for you. Are they both possible translations? Yes or no? The answer is no, they are not both possible. The only one that's correct is the one with que. You cannot use quien this way. Now, some of you may be like, hey, I use quien like that. Well, you should watch this video, there's a lot of stuff going on here. Now, I'm not saying that quien is not a relative pronoun. It is. I mean, it would be correct in sentences like, the man you spoke with yesterday is my uncle. El hombre con quien hablaste ayer es mi tío. But in that other sentence, not correct. And instead of using quien, we could use el que or el cual. El hombre con quien, con el que, con el cual hablaste ayer es mi tío. So how do you know which to use and when? Well, all you have to do is watch this video because I'm going to break this down into simple rules that you can remember so you can use all of these correctly. All right, let's go ahead and kick this thing off with the king of all relative pronouns, que. This is the one without the accent, folks. The one with the accent means what. The one without the accent is often translated into English as that, which, or who, just depending how it's being used in the sentence. This is our relative pronoun. It helps connect clauses. Let's take a look at these English sentences. The man who lives in the greenhouse is my uncle. The book that Maria recommended is very interesting. The names which appear on this list belong to the winners. In these sentences, who, that, and which are all our relative pronouns in English. They're different, but we only have one option when we're placing these in Spanish, and it is with the word que. That's the only option, folks. El hombre que vive en la casa verde es mi tío. El libro que recomendó María es muy interesante. Los nombres que aparecen en esta lista pertenecen a los ganadores. See? Que. Que is the only option here because these are restrictive clauses. I know you're like, great, more grammatical terms, Paul. Yeah. No, this one's really important. Just remember restrictive clauses. You're going to hear it a lot. And you're going to hear non-restrictive clauses, okay? That's what's important. Restrictive clauses means that the clause, the sentence, provides essential information about the noun and you can't omit this section of the sentence or the sentence doesn't make any sense. When we have restrictive clauses, que is our only option for connecting these things. So that makes it pretty easy, right? Now here's the tricky part for us English speakers, and that is recognizing when we have to use que. You're like, okay, well, I get it, Paul. We have a relative pronoun in English. It's a restrictive clause. We're using que. What are you talking about? Well, the problem is in English, a lot of times we will leave out the relative pronoun completely. For example, the book that I read yesterday was interesting. My relative pronoun is what? That, right? The book that I read yesterday. It's connecting our sentence. But could I just say, the book I read yesterday is interesting? Yes. Yes, I can. And that's the problem with English is we drop the relative pronoun a lot. But it is never dropped in Spanish. It absolutely has to be there. So the trick here is to think of your English a little bit differently. And this is not that tough to do. You get used to it. For example, if you said something in English like, the movie I want to see is called The Adventures of Qroo. Could you say, the movie that I want to see is The Adventures of Qroo? Yes. And that's how you need to think. And then you'll be like, okay, in the Spanish, I'm going to pop that que in there. La película que quiero ver se llama Las Aventuras de Qroo, right? But we have la película que, the movie that. So you start to get a feel for this? Good. So what about quien, el que, la cual, etc.? What about all of those, all right? Well, those are options in certain circumstances. And since I keep stressing how que is our only option in restrictive clauses, you might be thinking, okay, I see a pattern here. This is where non-restrictives come in, Paul, right? Yeah, you're right. This is where they come in. Now, before I move on to this next category, and I'm going to start with quien and quienes, I want to tell you about my paid membership group, the Qroo Spanish Crew, in case you're unfamiliar with it. I created this group to help people at all levels improve their Spanish. It's just for folks who just need, just more of a boost. They want to get there faster. On that site, you'll find exclusive courses, videos, downloads, and even live events. You can also ask me questions directly through the forum there. Just a lot going on. I suggest you check it out. There's a URL on the screen. All right, let's get back into this. We're going to talk about quien and quienes, right? That's who, and quienes is the plural for who. Notice there are no accent marks here. That's going to differentiate it from the question words. ¿Quién trabaja aquí? Who works here? That's the question word. This is the quien and quienes that mean who that are going to help us connect clauses. For example, el hombre con quien hablaste ayer acaba de llegar. The man with whom you spoke yesterday just arrived. And if you're not familiar with that last part, acaba de llegar, that's from acabar plus de plus infinitive, to have just done something. You see, you're going to learn all kinds of things through this lesson. Just put that on your word list. Super useful. All right, so now we're going to go through the rules when you can use quien and quienes. This is the important part, and it's the thing you need to remember, okay? Just reduce the language to a series of little patterns or rules that you can remember. Number one on this list. Quien and quienes can only refer to people. And I don't know why I have to point that out, but I do because I see sometimes people trying to make it refer to other things, so I'm just going to put it on there. Number two, they can be used in non-restrictive clauses. Remember I said restrictive clauses before? Restrictive clauses is when all of the information is important. You cannot omit anything without changing the meaning or losing what you want in that sentence. For example, my brother is coming to visit us. Mi hermano viene a visitarnos. That's just a restrictive clause. I can't really omit anything. A non-restrictive clause, also known as a non-essential or non-defining clause, is a clause that provides additional information about a noun but doesn't change its meaning. This is extra information that could be removed without changing the overall message of the sentence. Non-restrictive clauses are typically set off by commas, parentheses, or dashes, and often begin with relative pronouns like which, who, or whose. For example, my brother, who lives in Mexico, is coming to visit us. Mi hermano, quien vive en México, viene a visitarnos. See, we have quien. That is a non-restrictive clause, right? We have little commas there. It kind of offsets, because the most important part of that sentence is my brother's coming to visit us. So even when I'm saying it and you're not seeing commas, you're hearing it, right? You understand that that's a non-restrictive clause. I call it an aside. My brother, who lives in Mexico, is coming to visit us, an aside. Now, what about que? I mean, that was our king of all, relative pronouns. Can we use que? Yeah, we can still use que in the sentence. We could say, mi hermano, que vive en México, viene a visitarnos. So you could use que or quien in those, and you actually have more options, but we'll get to those, all right? Don't read ahead here. Now, another time when you can use quien and quienes is after prepositions. Remember, prepositions are all through the language, super, super important. El hombre con quien hablaste ayer acaba de llegar. The man you talked with yesterday just arrived. That would sound more natural in English. But what this is literally saying is, the man with whom you spoke yesterday just arrived. Which sounds formal to me in English, right? This is important in Spanish. This doesn't sound formal in Spanish. This is how you have to do it because Spanish does not have dangling prepositions. And I know in English we say, well, you shouldn't have dangling prepositions, should you? Should you? I don't know. People still debate about that. So when we look at our sentence, the man you talked with yesterday, okay, let's leave off the yesterday. The man you talked with or talked to, that's just dangling that with too. It's just dangling out there. Spanish doesn't like that. So we have to change our structure a little bit. El hombre, the man, con quien, with whom hablaste ayer, you spoke yesterday, acaba de llegar. There, that, just arrived again. You're going to hear that a lot, okay? So take a look at this sentence. The friend I talked to you about works here. You see, in the English, the friend I talked to you about, that about is just kind of hanging out there. We're not going to have that in Spanish. We're going to have to tighten this up, get rid of that dangling preposition. We're going to get something like, la amiga de quien te hablé trabaja aquí, right? La amiga de quien, the friend, about whom te hablé, I spoke with you, trabaja aquí, works here. Starting to see how this works? All right, now let's move on to el que, la que, los que, las que. And we often translate these as, like, say, the one that or the ones that. That might help you remember it. Unlike quien and quienes, which can only be used for people, these can be used for people, animals, things, anything. It's very, very versatile. So let's talk about when to use them, all right? Number one on our list is you can use them in non-restrictive clauses. See, just like quien. I like patterns. This is a pattern you're going to hear. Remember this sentence? My brother, who lives in Mexico, is coming to visit us. And so far we had two options, right? Well, we got another one. El que. Mi hermano, el que vive en Mexico, viene a visitarnos. And it's el que because it's singular masculine. So if I want to say my female cousin, who lives in Mexico, is coming to visit us, it would be mi prima, la que vive en México, viene a visitarnos. Or it could be quien vive en México or que vive en México. What if we make it plural, my cousins, and it's a mixed group of male and females, which means we have to use the masculine plural. Mis primos, los que viven en México, vienen a visitarnos. Or we could have quienes viven en México, because it's quienes, because it's plural, or que viven en México. So it can be in non-restrictive clauses. The next thing it can be in is after prepositions. Just like quien and quienes, right? We're just repeating these patterns. We can plug this in. Now let's make it a little bit more interesting. You'll hear me in my videos talk about the importance of learning Spanish verbs with their accompanying prepositions so you use them correctly. A great example of this is to fall in love with someone, because in Spanish you don't say with, you become enamored of them. Enamorarse de. So it's very important to learn that preposition. Well, since that verb uses a preposition all the time, it's fantastic to use here with relative pronouns, right? The person that I fell in love with just arrived. So what do you notice that dangling preposition out there? Spanish does not have dangling prepositions, so we have to change the way we think of this a little bit, make it more like the person with whom I fell in love just arrived, but we need to make sure we're using the correct preposition, right? De instead of con. So we're going to come up with something like la persona de la que me enamoré acaba de llegar. Let's break that down. La persona, the person, de la que. That is our, like, of whom, I became enamored. That part, de la que. Why is it la que? Because it's la persona. Me enamoré, I fell in love. And then the rest is what we talked about before. Acaba de llegar, just arrived. Now that one was a little bit more complex because not only did you have to deal with that enamorarse de, you were working in your relative pronouns. So you had to work your brain a little more on that one, right? Let's do another verb that commonly has a preposition. Quejarse de, to complain about something. That about is going to be that de. The man I complained about just arrived. That about is just hanging out there. It's a dangling preposition. We don't like that, so we're going to tighten it up a little bit. We're going to get something more like this. El hombre del que me quejé acaba de llegar. The man about whom I complained just arrived. We're making sure we still use de because that's what our verb uses, right? So far we have our non-restrictive clauses, and then we have after prepositions, and we're going to add another one here. After the verb ser, you're commonly going to see these, the el que, la que, los que, las que. This is an option. The documents that we have are the ones that Maria asked for. Los documentos que tenemos son los que pidió María. Los documentos que tenemos, the documents that we have, son los que, are the ones that pidió María, Maria asked for. And if you're not familiar with the verb there, the infinitive is pedir, pedir, and it means to ask for something. It includes the for. You don't have to add it in Spanish. Now, another way you'll be using these is to translate the one that or the ones that as kind of a standalone. For example, the one that lives in the greenhouse is my uncle, right? El que vive en la casa verde es mi tío. This is a great sentence starter. And if we're talking about a female, we have to make sure it agrees, right? La que vive en la casa verde es mi tía. Let's say we're talking about the boxes, las cajas. And I want to say, the ones that are in the kitchen are mine. This is where this construction is going to come in, all right? You want to go ahead and do that one? The ones that are in the kitchen are mine, talking about boxes. You got it? Las que están en la cocina son mías. Let's move on to el cual, la cual, los cuales, and las cuales. And you'll notice there are no accent marks. In fact, none of the relative pronouns have accent marks. Just something to note there. Now, these are very similar to the el que, la que, which I'm just going to call the el que series just to save some time here. But they are a bit more formal. And although they're often interchangeable, they're not interchangeable in every circumstance. So we're going to talk about that. Just like with the el que series, you can use the el cual series in non-restrictive clauses. My brother, who lives in Mexico, is coming to visit us. We've seen this example a lot, haven't we? Mi hermano, el cual vive en México, viene a visitarnos. And we can use these after prepositions. The person I fell in love with just arrived. See? La cual. And we know we can put other things in there too, right? And just like with the el que series, we can use the el cual series after the verb ser, to be. The book that's on the table is the one I was looking for. El libro que está sobre la mesa es el cual estaba buscando. And it's el cual because it's el libro. Now, could I have said el que? Of course I could. El libro que está sobre la mesa es el que estaba buscando. Could I have said quien? No, because a book's not a person. Remember, with quien and quienes, it can only be people, folks. Only people. Now, one way that el que and el cual will differ is you're not going to be using el cual to say, like, the one that lives in the green house. Don't do that. Use el que, okay? El que vive en la casa verde is my uncle, es mi tío, is my friend, es mi amigo. Now, in other circumstances, you could use either el que or el cual, and students will be like, well, which one should I use? Well, one thing to keep in mind is that el cual can sound a bit more formal. So I recommend that the el que series be kind of your default standard 90% of the time. Now, when it comes to what native speakers do, it's not always as easy as that. You see, what sounds best to them if they liked el que or el cual in a particular, say, construction will vary a bit by country and region. You know, the scholars have done a bunch of surveys. Hey, in Madrid they use this more, in Mexico they use this more. And I don't even want to go down that rabbit hole because it's just going to muddy it up, and at the end of the day, you're not going to learn anything. But what I will do is focus on two tendencies in Spanish that are pretty universal across, the Spanish-speaking countries on when el cual tends to be the preferred choice. Number one on this list is that after prepositional phrases, you'll often see el cual. Remember, prepositional phrase is going to be, more than just one word prepositions, not por or en or de, like a través de, via. The lines of communication via which we keep in touch are failing. Las líneas de comunicación a través de las cuales nos mantenemos en contacto están fallando. See? Las cuales. And why is it las cuales? Because it's las líneas de comunicación. Now, another tendency is when the relative pronoun is separated from whatever it's referring to by several intervening words. In that case, you're likely to see el cual or one of the other variations. Something like, the trees on my grandfather's farm, under which I used to play as a child, have grown a lot over the years. Los árboles de la granja de mi abuelo, bajo los cuales solía jugar de niño, han crecido mucho con los años. See, we're really separated out los árboles, the trees, and when I finally talk about them again, under which I used to play, los cuales is gonna be the tendency, the preference for many Spanish speakers. Will you see los que? Sure, we're talking tendencies here and not rules. So let's go ahead and move on to our very last category. Hopefully you're still with us at this point. I know it's been a long video. Lo que and lo cual. Lo que and lo cual are neuter relative pronouns that we use to refer back to an idea, concept, or an entire clause rather than a specific noun that we can identify, as like being masculine or feminine. And unlike el que and la que, which change form based on the gender of that noun, these are just neuter, so we use lo. Now don't confuse this lo with the direct object pronoun lo, like lo veo, I see it. This is a different one, all right? So here's an example. She arrived late, which surprised everyone. That which part, we could use lo cual in there, because it's like the concept. It's this whole, arriving late concept that surprised everyone. And say something like, ella llegó tarde, lo cual sorprendió a todos. Or you could say, lo que sorprendió a todos. Either one of those. Now, that's a usage, I don't know how often you're going to be popping that in there, with lo cual. To be honest with you, I don't use lo cual very much. I'm definitely a lo que guy. And the reason is that it's so much more useful in the Spanish language. It's absolutely everywhere. Most of the time we're using lo que, we're using it to translate like that which or what. And not the question word what, more like the what in sentences like these. You know what I want. What I want is ice cream. I want to talk about what happened yesterday. Hear those whats? Those aren't the question word whats. Now, when you look at those sentences, could you replace what with either the thing or that which? You know that which I want. You know the thing that I want. It's pretty good. The thing that I want is ice cream. That which I want is ice cream. I want to talk about the thing that happened yesterday. I want to talk about that which happened yesterday. If you can do that, then lo que is what you need to pop in there. You know what I want. ¿Sabes lo que quiero? What I want is ice cream. Lo que quiero es helado. I want to talk about what happened yesterday. Quiero hablar sobre lo que pasó ayer. See? Lo que, lo que, lo que. Super, super useful. All right? All right, I am out of coffee, and that's the end of the video. If you liked it, just do me a favor and give it a thumbs up. And until next time, hasta luego.